Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to ShiftHappens, your apocalypse podcast. I'm Rob Thompson. I'm here joined again by Jesse Campbell. And today, following our format, we're just going to have a free-form discussion, but with a little tweak. Jesse is holding this in his hand right now, Locke's second treatise on government. And so we're thinking today we're just going to have Jesse give a rundown on what this means. I'm going to ask him some questions, and we might segue into parallels today. I have a lot of questions about frameworks and politics today. And anyway, so that's the topic of today. It's the second treatise of Locke's second treatise of government. So without further ado, take it away, Jesse. Why this book, and what's its relevance to you?
So I've mentioned before that I've majored in political science. I've taken an interesting path politically in my life. I started out as a teenager that was very liberal-minded. I thought, I'm going to be a Democrat forever because I care. And then when I got into the military, I'm going to be a Republican forever because I know. And now I'm a libertarian because I really think it's because I've been educated. One of, to me, the best thinkers, or at least not the best necessarily, but probably one of the most important forefathers of liberty is, to me, John Locke. He published Second Treatise of Government back in 1690, when the divine right of kings was still somewhat very much alive. That was before our revolution, when we were tyrannized by the King of England, but they also had a legislative body back then, the Parliament. And he goes over these things. Probably the very basis and axiomatic part of his theory, and this is a theory of the civil society, is natural law, or natural rights, I should say.
Let me ask you a couple questions here, right there. I know, but what is a libertarian? Let me ask you, what is a libertarian? Why are you a libertarian?
I am a libertarian because I believe that the very basis of morality is consent. That covers your very most basic corners of murder, rape, and theft. It explains why those things are wrong. The difference between theft and a gift, consent. The difference between sex and rape, consent. The difference between, hot topic button, but murder and assisted suicide, consent. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that consent can be applied axiomatically to morality, morality being the basis of society in general. And I just believe that people ought to do things voluntarily. You want higher taxes? Great. Go pay higher taxes. You are more than welcome to. Don't make me pay higher taxes. Maybe I need that money. You know what I mean? I don't believe in the power of coercion. I think that every time a political body is coercing you to do something, probably it's not in your best interests. I believe that good ideas don't require force.
So, two questions come to mind. Can a person opt out? A person be able to opt out of the social contract?
Locke says yes.
Okay.
Locke says yes. That he says a man, obviously a person. Again, 1690. Is a different time. He thinks that someone can simply step out of the social contract. And that's an interesting thought, too, because people are like, we got to do this and this and this, and you have to abide by it because of the social contract. Well, for instance, real estate, shameless plug really fast, we are both real estate agents and we deal in contracts. And if you force someone to sign a contract, you coerce them in any way, shape, or form, it makes that contract voidable because they signed under duress. I'm here to say that possibly if you're being forced into the social contract, it's under duress and it makes said contract therefore voidable. Locke would agree with me and says that man may step out of the social contract. He can go back to the state of nature at any time.
So what relevance does a 320 plus year old book have today? Well,
it holds a lot of relevance.
Why should I care?
I think you should care for a lot of reasons. One of them being that man is created equal. And, me being, an atheist, I'm an, interesting person, veteran Marine, libertarian, atheist. Where does it stop? I don't think, obviously, that we're created. I think that we're just here. But I do think that you and I are equals. If we follow Thomas Hobbes' train of thought on equality, generally, people are the exact same. It's really rare to have someone above 6 foot tall. Like, if you find someone that's like 7 feet tall, that's insane. If you find an adult lower than 4 feet tall, also insane. But relatively speaking, we're all generally the same. And I think that personally, he thinks that the basis of equality is from God. I think that the basis of equality is from biology. We're generally the same. It's like they say that dogs are more differentiated biologically than humans are. I agree with that. People keep on looking at black, white, yellow, red, and brown as if we're completely different races. That's crazy. That's crazy talk to me. If we were to compare ourselves to dogs, which I think is a majestic beast, I would say that our quote-unquote races or ethnicities, which are completely just arbitrary and ridiculous to me, it's like comparing German Shepherds, Pit Bulls, Rottweilers. Like, we're all strong, we're all capable, and we're all just kind of here trying to do our thing.
Okay. Would you say... I often ask myself, why does theory matter? I enjoy reading books too, and frameworks, and these discussions, thus this podcast, right? But I admit to a somewhat of a nihilist viewpoint at sometimes of why does it even matter with our current state of politics? No one's listening. I feel like no one is listening to one another. We're so divided. The special election in Pennsylvania last night, approximately 207,000 votes, maybe 208,000 votes. Libertarian candidate, I think, got 1,500 votes. The Republican and Democrat literally got 103,070 votes and 103,700 votes. So divided. That right there, that statistic blew me away, that we're so evenly divided. Why does it even matter? Like, is sometimes when I ask myself, then I say to myself, because we're so divided, that's where we maybe need to go back to this theory and hit pause and say, mentally pause and say, step outside the social media, step outside the echo chambers that we've built, and kind of return to more thoughtful, critical thought. You said something a minute ago too that I would just highlight, the dichotomy of choices, or where we're given these A/B choices. I also have been thinking a lot recently that society and life seems to throw options at you and then force you to decide. You must do this or this, and so Seth Godin talks about how you can hit mental pause and say, and sometimes literal pause and say, actually, I have other options, and I can explore those options. So I don't need to do your A/B choice. So that's the frame of mind that I'm in. Is just so
you want to know why theory matters.
I suppose
the interesting thing about theory is completely invented by man. They are used to describe and explain phenomenons. One theory cannot, therefore, account for all phenomenons. It's really hard to explain this politically, so I'll do it scientifically. Look at quantum mechanics versus relativity. They both explain the phenomenons that they cover, but neither of them cover all of what the other does too. They can both be applied, sometimes at the same time. Sometimes they both cover the same phenomenons. If I were to draw you a Venn diagram, it would be like there is a middle ground between the two, and I don't know. It's interesting because that shows that even with something so axiomatic as numbers, there is still some subjectivity. The theory of the civil society is the theory on why we should have a more voluntary society. And I think personally, like you mentioned the dichotomy of the Republicans versus Democrats and why people are so polarized. I know exactly why people are so polarized. And that is because either of those two will use arbitrary and coercive use of force, deadly use of force, to make what they're calling the other do what they will.
I think that's a significant problem. I can't even remember what the court case was, but years ago, I was watching the news or something, and there was this supposedly landmark case, and on the steps of the Supreme Court, the reporter asked the losing side, "Hey, so now that you've lost at the Supreme Court, what next?" And I remember thinking at that moment, what do you mean, what next? The Supreme Court of the United States of America just ruled against you. Your argument is wrong. And I'm not to maybe be so definitive, but if the Supreme Court just weighed against you, you give it some thought. You have to hit pause and give it some thought. The attorney immediately said something that effectively, well, we're going to come at it from a different angle. And I remember thinking then we were in a lot of trouble, and I think now it's that trouble is more manifest. What you just said, and I think both sides. It seems like there's no compromise anymore.
No,
there's no.
And they both want to force the other to do.
They want to use the power of the state to force. Now, whether or not we agree with the principle or whatever, I think it does boil down to we're no longer talking to one another. Now we're trying to use the power of the state to enforce your will on the other side.
Well, it's funny too because they're both authoritative too.
Versus saying, why can't? Versus why must there be a law to address this? Why can't it just be personal choice?
Yeah. But neither of them will allow that. They will say it's my way or the highway, essentially. And it's funny too because you know what? Republicans and Democrats are the same thing. They're the same thing. They both want the police state. They both want endless wars and violence. They both want surveillance. They both want the welfare state. It's just that what placement that they put those things, that's what differentiates. So the big argument is whether or not we should spend more money on wars or more money on welfare. They're both pro-war and welfare. I'm here to tell you this definitively. It is demonstrably true that they are both pro-welfare and war. It's just that where their priorities lie is the main difference.
Good food for thought.
Good food for thought. And they both want to impose their will forcefully.
Well, that part I agree with. That we're at a point where they're both just using the power of the state to advance whatever.
Yep.
I would say, too, one other thought on the why theory matters. I go back to a practical example a lot. From a theoretical perspective, I'm a homeowner, and I generally speaking, could maybe generally describe when I turn the faucet on, how the water gets to my house, right? So as the homeowner, does the theory matter to me so much as of how the plumbing system works? No, but to the plumber who I call when I have issues, the theory matters a lot. And so that's what I go back to in my own brain a lot is okay, the theory matters to the plumber. It might not matter to the city who's fighting water permit issues, right? But even then it probably matters to them too because delivery. But anyway, to the plumber it matters. That's where I'm going. Didn't mean to segue so significantly from the book, but so I think the answer to my question is, what relevance does it have today with the numbers, the quantum mechanics? Also, with the practical example, I think we addressed it. It matters to the plumber. If you want to be the plumber, then you need to know the theory. So okay, so can a person opt out? We talked about. What is natural law, and take it from here.
Oh, natural law. Yeah, so he actually
give us the rundown on the book.
Yeah. This is gonna be a bit heavy. Stick with me. I'm gonna read it really fast, and then I'm gonna put it in layman's terms because this is literally from 1690, so it's gonna sound crazy. So this is his foregoing disclosure. 1. That Adam had not, either by natural right of fatherhood or by positive donation from God, any such authority over his children or dominion over the world as is pretended. 2. That if he had, his heirs yet had no right to it. 3. that if his heirs had, there being no law of nature nor positive law of God that determines which is the right heir in all cases may arise, the right of succession and consequently of bearing rule could not have been certainly determined. 4. That even if that had been determined, yet the knowledge of which is the eldest line of Adam's posterity, being so long since utterly lost, that in the races of mankind and families of the world there remains not to one above another the least pretense to be the eldest house and to have had the right of inheritance.
Ooh.
That's heavy.
Translation. There is no divine right.
No, not really. What he's saying is your rights don't come from inheritance.
Okay.
Your rights don't come from dominion over land or by being greater than another. He's saying that, if it were passed down, it would have to be from the eldest of Adam, and then only his descendants of the eldest of Adam would have dominion over the land. He's saying that's not true. He's saying everybody has rights. They come from not man but God, and that no one can take those away because all man is created equal. I would agree, except for obviously with the God part. I think that rights just exist because we are sovereign as individuals and we have self-ownership. And that can be explained in later chapters. That's pretty much like the chapter 1, just going over where rights come from. And essentially, it's not from law. They're just there already. You already have an intrinsic right to anything, really. Property, speech, things like that. That's the kinds of stuff he's talking about. Is your right to do these things come from God, or I would say yourself. Like, you can choose yourself to say what you want. If someone else punches you in the face for it, that's kind of their thing. But you can still say it. They cannot take away your right to say that, even if they try.
Because of an inherent natural law.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's some sort of inherent natural law. And then, skip chapter 2 on accident. So this is a good book. This is a really good book. I really recommend it if you haven't read it yet. It reads very intense. That's just his voice the entire time. It sounds like you're reading the Bible on liberty. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's probably a good breakdown of what that book is.
Yeah,
that's the Bible on liberty.
I think that's what it is. The second chapter is the state of nature. There are several main state of nature theorists, that being Locke, Hobbes, and Rousseau. The state of nature is what man or humans are before society. I will argue about this probably later, but Locke is saying that before government, before society, man is generally inherently good, and that there's essentially a few bad apples. That's pretty much the state of nature, that we are naturally social creatures. We are very peaceful. We engage in trade with one another. We build our own lives. That's what I would call transcendental. You have that would be, I think, another right that you have inherently is transcendence, coming from point A and moving up to point B. Whatever that may be, whatever you want to flourish in your life, you can do so. And that's kind of what exists in the state of nature. And then after that, there's actually a state of war. This is an idea that's coming back from Hobbes. Hobbes talks about the state of war, and Locke is kind of adopting it here. Pretty much it exists at any level. In the state of nature, if someone tries to harm you, you must put yourself at a state of war to defend yourself. You have to do what is necessary if you want to survive. That's pretty much the state of war. And stop me at any time if you have any questions. And that, is something else that is intrinsically human, is the state of war. Of slavery, he says that slavery is bogus. No man has dominion rights over another. That is something that he cannot take away. Again, that goes back to me that rights come from yourself. Like, even if you had a quote unquote slave master and they said not to do X, Y, and Z, you can still choose to do X, Y, and Z. There is no divine force that's gonna, like, if he says you can't touch your right forefinger to your nose, it's gonna be physically possible for you to still do so. And so because of that, there's no slavery. It doesn't exist. You can try, but it's tyrannical. It's despotical.
There's no inherent right to slavery.
Yeah, you don't get to own other people.
Exist, but yeah.
And I want to point out too, this again, this is from 1690.
Yeah.
Just astounding to me that, you know, I think it's hilarious that people look at our forefathers like some sort of slave owning mongrels, which they did indeed own slaves. But I just love pointing out that, you know, back in 1690, Locke was saying that that's bogus. Man is equal. And therefore, because man is equal, you don't get to own other men. That's a very good moral justification against slavery. And I'm really happy that it's in the Bible of liberty. Of property, he's pretty much saying that you have a right to your own preservation and consequently to meat and drink. So in other words, because you have a right to live, just intrinsically, that means that you get to eat and drink in order to survive. And this is, you know, chapter 5 is of property. That's what it's called. His basis of property is actually labor. He's saying, what makes an apple your apple? Well, if you physically reach up and pick that apple for yourself, and if it's not on someone else's property, that apple is yours because you put forth the labor to get that apple. If someone tries to take that apple, you get to put yourself at a state of war. That's what property is. And so if you were to, let's apply this at a greater scale. If you were to go out and homestead, stake your claim or whatever, that was the very basis of homesteading, by the way, in earlier times for America, is you go out and you work the land and now you own that land. Even the Native Americans who didn't have formal... Oh, go ahead.
Doesn't that contradict what you said a moment ago about you can't take my property? Mm-hmm. But now you're saying that he says if I do take it, then it's mine.
Well, no, you don't get to take it.
Okay.
If it's in the commons and you start working it and you build it up,
gotcha.
Then it's your property.
Okay.
And you know, people will be like, oh, well, the Native Americans didn't believe in property. They did. They believed in more of a communal sort of property. They didn't have the same priorities that we did. But they did indeed have farms. And if other tribes try to come into those farms and take their goods, they would put themselves at a state of war. So even if they said they don't believe in property, they kind of did. And to Locke, that comes from labor. What you make is yours. That's what he is saying. And then chapter 6 is of paternal power. I'll get into this later. I'm not going to get in too far into the weeds, but there's essentially 3 kinds of power. There is paternal power, it was political power, and despotical power. This one, being paternal power, is that power of which you as a parent... he actually says not necessarily of a father specifically, but a father and a mother. So he thinks it should be parental power, but he just used the word paternal for the chapter, even though he destroys that like in the first paragraph. So why even use that? I don't know. But he's saying essentially like when a child is born, they can't defend themselves. You know, there does exist in man some differentiating inequality insofar as age or capabilities, and what gives a parent that paternal power is the fact that that child needs you to survive, and so you need to hold dominion over them. Like if a child wants to jump in a lake and doesn't know how to swim, it's kind of your duty. It's a fiduciary duty to not let them jump in that lake if they don't know how to swim. You need to physically stop them from doing that.
And teach them to swim. Yeah.
Exactly. And he says that, he doesn't talk about a specific age. To him, it's not 18. To him, it's when you are grown up and you're capable. The more capable you become, the less paternal power. Yeah.
The less dominion.
Exactly.
This is something occurred to me as you're speaking about this. Another reason why theory matters, and I think an understanding of the theory allows you to step outside the box that has been the box with arbitrary lines that the people would draw for you, or the system would draw for you and say, here's your box. And well, actually, no, you don't have the authority to tell me that is my box. That's your box. This is my box, and I'm going to take my box and I'm going to go in the woods and I'm going to fish. And yeah, so I think it allows you to step outside step outside and see the battle for what it is. The race last night in Pennsylvania, and I'm not trying to steer back to politics, but the race last night in Pennsylvania, something you said earlier, I mentioned earlier how close it was and how divided we are. As you're discussing this theory, the image in my head is that's a box, and it's interesting. You can step outside that box and view. You can hold both views simultaneously. It's fascinating. We're very divided, but you can also step outside and say there's a larger context for that argument, and then there's a larger. Yeah, it just allows you to step outside the box and view it as a box. Even that framework helps maybe cope with. Yeah. Helps you cope with the micro. Yeah. Anyway,
that's funny. You actually mentioned boxes. The next part is of political or civil society. He's saying that conjugal society is made by a voluntary compact. Yep. So there it is. That is civil society. Is it must be voluntary and a compact. That's what makes a society civil. Is that we can come together voluntarily and agree upon terms. I don't think he really gets into this, but I'm going to sit here and tell you that maybe if a country is so divided on something, don't make a law about it. Don't force 49.9% of the population to do what 50.1% of the population says to do is right.
I can see your viewpoint there.
Look at the things we're so divided on, though. It's not going to be murder, rape, and theft. Yeah. That's going to be like 99%, probably, just off the top of my head.
I don't know what it's called. I thought it was called normative ethics, but someone schooled me on that recently. For lack of a better term, I've always held to this thought of what I thought was called normative ethics, that the right thing to do in a circumstance is what all rational actors would agree is the right thing to do. And
I disagree, though. I think it's the right thing to do is what others allow you and consent to you doing.
Okay, let's dissect that for a second. Murder. There's a prohibition, legal prohibition against murder. Under the system I just described, and I know that none of us are purely rational actors, but this model requires you to examine it in that framework. So all rational actors would agree that murder, defined as the arbitrary, not self-defense, but murder, so defined as the arbitrary execution of someone, is wrong, because if in a purely rational sense, if we did not have a prohibition against murder, then you could be murdered. And so all rational actors would agree that murder is bad because I could be murdered.
What if only 50% of rational actors agree on something?
Well, but that's not what I just said, though. I said, what if all rational actors agreed? And I would say that the other 50% are not rational then they're excluded from that model because
who decides who's rational?
And there we go. This is why we can't have nice things.
Well, it goes back to who watches the watchers.